In this presentation, you will learn about notable amendments and reforms to the National Flood Insurance Program since its inception in 1968. These key terms and acronyms will be used during this presentation. You can find the terms and their definitions at the web address on screen. Video 1 provided an introduction to the history of natural disasters that led to early flood control efforts in the United States, and in turn that created the NFIP in 1968. Since 1968, Congress has amended the NFIP several times to address some of its limitations. To better understand the current system, it will be helpful to understand the context of these amendments and the challenges they were designed to address. The first major amendment was the Flood Disaster Protection Act of 1973, which was passed as a result of Tropical Storm Agnes in 1972. Agnes caused widespread destruction along the Atlantic coast and cost the nation more in disaster assistance than any other previous disaster. At the time, very few communities participated in the NFIP, and many owners of flood-prone property opted not to purchase flood insurance, instead relying on federal disaster assistance to pay for their recovery. The Flood Disaster Protection Act of 1973 prohibits federal agencies from constructing or providing financial assistance for the construction of buildings in the floodplain in any community that does not participate in the NFIP. The 1973 Act resulted in a dramatic increase in the number of communities joining the NFIP, jumping from 2,200 participating communities in 1973 to 15,000 by 1977. The Flood Disaster Protection Act also established a mandatory flood insurance purchase requirement for structures with federally backed mortgages that are located in identified special flood hazard areas. This requirement increased the number of policies in force from only 100,000 when Agnes made landfall to approximately 1.2 million policies just 5 years later. As of 2012, there were more than 5.5 million flood insurance policies in force nationwide. Congress acted again in 1994 by amending the Flood Disaster Protection Act with the National Flood Insurance Reform Act. The 1994 Act sought to further decrease the financial burden of flooding on the federal government, taxpayers, and flood victims by increasing compliance with flood insurance purchase requirements and increasing property owners' participation in the NFIP. The 1994 Act accomplishes this by increasing the maximum amount of flood insurance coverage available to property owners, establishing fines for mortgage lenders that fail to ensure the mandatory purchase of flood insurance on properties located in flood-prone areas, establishing a grant program for states and communities to develop flood mitigation plans and implement mitigation projects, and creating the Community Rating System, or CRS. Finally, the Flood Insurance Reform Act of 2004 established the Severe Repetitive Loss Program and the Repetitive Flood Claims Program. These programs are designed to reduce or eliminate the long-term risk of flood damage to residential structures with multiple flood loss claims, known as repetitive loss structures. A 2004 report by the General Accounting Office found that repetitive loss properties accounted for only 1% of total policies, but approximately 30% of all program claim costs. The Severe Repetitive Loss Program seeks to reduce the claims associated with the most frequently damaged of these properties, known as severe repetitive loss structures, by providing grants for, among other things, acquisition and demolition or relocation, structural elevation, and reconstruction to higher flood-resistant standards. Today, you have learned about notable amendments and reforms to the National Flood Insurance Program since its inception in 1968.